even like before starting to organize conferences, I was volunteering at them. And I continually say to this day, volunteering is a cheat code. Volunteering at conferences is a cheat code for someone who's new in the industry. Shout out to Taylor Dessen, who gave me that lesson the very first time.
I see y'all at every conference. You do the exact same thing. You don't have the results that you want, and it's the same scenario over and over and over again. Stop selling. Developers know this stuff, man. Like, can you just treat people like human beings? And I bet you that conversation is going to go way further.
And there has to be a balance. Like, don't just keep reading. Don't get stuck in that like tutorial hell or article hell, but also like don't close off like all the viewpoints. Like a lot of people, I'm using React and I don't care about anything else. Like that's the worst things you can do for your like learning journey.
What you gain in wealth of knowledge, you lose in actual wealth.
Yeah.
What's going on, everyone? We are back with another one. I am one of your hosts today. My name is Danny Thompson. I'm a director of technology at a company called This.Labs.
And I'm Leon Noel, manager director of engineering at a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders and community member at 100 Devs.
And my name is Dev Agrawal. I am a software engineer at Smart Data. I work for the Solid.js core team, and I organize a conference called Momentum.
Pumped to have you. Excited to have you. You're one of my favorite people that I come across online all the time. I love the tweets and content you put out there. And there's one recently that got me thinking. I think it's a good way for us to kind of start our conversation here. I'm going to read it for folks. It's 2 parts, but the second part is what I like. You said, as someone who puts a lot of effort into understanding and explaining the differences between every approach, pros and cons, business context, and use cases, nothing boils my blood more than the ignorance of nuance. And so with that being said, why should I use Solid.js as a core maintainer?
Great way to turn that tweet around on me. So in my opinion, you would really appreciate using Solid.js if A, you really, really like React and you like its ideas, you enjoy working with React, and B, at the same time, you don't like working with React because of a lot of its little quirks and problems or like weird mental models that you have to fit into. So because from my perspective on Solid is that it takes some of the best ideas of React and removes its limitations. So from that perspective, like if you like the ideas that React brought to the table, but you don't like some of its maybe performance problems, or like it's so easy to run into infinite loop problems, or you're forced to use a framework for a lot of things that are not inbuilt to React. Those are things that you're frustrated by, then Solid.js would probably be a great choice for you. It might not be a great choice if you are looking to just hire a bunch of React developers like that are on the market, or if you just want to focus, like if you want to minimize the time that you have for building, so you just want to leverage everything from the ecosystem, and you have like weird requirements that might not be present in a smaller ecosystem. Those are cases where you might want to stick to React. But if those are things that like the manpower or the ecosystem that you can kind of deal with, then it'll be like an absolutely delightful choice.
What are some of those quirks and features that you feel like most people, when they kind of attempt Solid.js, like what comes to mind when you say that? Because whenever I read about Solid.js online, I don't have super much experience with it. Whenever I read about it, there's always a comment on like the tutorial or something that's like, the way I think about stuff just works with Solid, and it never did in terms of React. So I'm kind of curious more about like, what is that model that you see like so many people latch onto, and what are some of like the quirks that you feel Solid might actually be helpful with?
So it's like the first time that you started writing React, it probably took a very long time to adapt to the fact that your component functions like rerun. Like anything small that changes, or even if like something very unrelated changes, they're just going to rerun, and that's not how JavaScript works. Like JavaScript isn't pure idempotent functions where you can just keep running them over and over again. Because usually in JavaScript, when a function runs, you do something like you change some state, or you make an HTTP request, or like log into the console, you have these like kind of side effects or things that interact with the real world. And it's because JavaScript is like dynamic imperative language. It's and the way that components rerun, it kind of really forces you to think about it in like a pure functional programming kind of style, where your functions can't really do things that are side effectful, that like you cannot make an HTTP request, you cannot write to your screen, you cannot show some UI in your component. All you can do is take input and return output. That's it. So it is a very big shift in the mental model of just how JavaScript works. So that's like just one of those shifts that you have to make before you can like adopt React Brain. And Solid doesn't have that because Solid doesn't rerun components. So Solid's components are a lot more like regular JavaScript functions.
I've met Ryan Carniato in an interview that we've done together. Really, really great interview. If you haven't seen that, it's on the Modern Web podcast that I do. I'm one of the hosts on there, and we had like an hour and a half long conversation on this. And it's interesting because there were like a couple talking points that really kind of like stuck out to me. I've been thinking about it a lot. When it comes to Solid, I don't necessarily see Solid being spoken about a ton outside of like really strong developer circles, right? Like you go in certain pockets on social media, you'll see them talking about it. Or you go to even certain talking circles at a conference or a meetup, they may be talking about it. But as far as widespread goes, it doesn't have that full on adoption that you would think a tool like this would have in a certain way. And it's funny because sparked from that conversation that I had with Ryan, it's almost as if like the industry has gone like full circle, because one thing that we kind of kept discussing was like it's almost as if the industry hasn't figured out the distinct differences between where the server side thing should happen, where the client side thing should happen. It's almost like a weird mix and combination. And so now it's like the industry has gone full circle. Like before there was like server rendered apps like PHP, Rails, etc. Then went fully client side SPAs, and now we're back to hybrid mode. And so it's like, why are we going through this? But then it's interesting to me because when it comes to like Solid.js, you know, a lot of tools that are built, it's like we're focused on the user experience, or we're focused on the developer experience, which is great. Like, of course, and I've seen that trend more recent be heavily focused than previously. I felt like some tools back in the day, they weren't really caring too much about what the developer experience was. It was like, hey, we're putting this out. Customers love it. Sucks to be you if you don't like it, but the customer does, right? But now it's like you have your developer experience tools. Solid, and even Ryan said something. He's like, I don't start at like the client side, like the user experience, and I don't start with the developer experience. I believe in starting with performance first and then focus on everything after that. Like, do you feel like that makes sense in the long term? Like, and then I guess on top of that, like, where are situations where this makes sense? Because one thing that we talked about, and I definitely want to dig into, is single flight mutations. And for a while, at least the way that I saw it on social media, I didn't see why this is a thing to even mention. And it wasn't until it finally got broken down to me where it's like everything you do is in React and Angular, etc. There's a mutation that happens where it goes out and it comes back. So that trip takes 2 turns. Whereas a single flight mutation, it's taking one instance to do that thing. So if something normally goes 400 milliseconds, you cut it literally in half to 200 milliseconds. You've sped this thing up almost 100% just by that one transition. And so that blew my mind when it finally was explained in those terms and I was able to conceptualize. I'm like, I'm cutting everything by 50%. Totally makes sense why this is a big deal. And so I guess like, what are your thoughts around, I guess, that whole, I ran my mouth way too long. I apologize. I'm realizing that now. But I geek out about this. And so I'm really like, number one, I'm obviously interested in your thoughts to a certain degree, but number two, I'd love to talk about this.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like Ryan's approach to things. Like, I want to make sure it's performant first, and then like if it's not performant, I'm not even going to waste my time on it. It's a really interesting perspective because have you guys played D&D, Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah.
So you would know that if you have a crew in D&D, you can't be like all mages or all warriors or all assassins. Like, you need a diversity of crews so that you can make sure you handle every like whatever the DM throws at you, right?
Yeah.
I think the tooling landscape, the framework landscape is kind of similar. Like, you need people who just like who ignore all efficiency things in the present and focus on like, I have this vision of the future and that's what I want to achieve, and we'll think about performance when we get there. I'm talking about React. Then then we need someone like Ryan who's like, okay, I don't care about the future. I want to make sure that things are performant first, and then we'll make sure how we can get the other things. And then you have folks like Angular, which is like, I want to build the most complete tool set that we can for people to build everything with it. And then so it's like every framework, every author has like their own mindset, and we can never say that this is the one that everyone should have, because they all bring something to the table. And at the end of the day, they all end up influencing each other a lot, right? So it again, like in D&D terms, you need that diversity of crew. And in that situation, like if we needed someone like Ryan, because now everyone has signals. If Ryan wasn't there, if we didn't have that mindset, we would still have all the other frameworks, but they wouldn't be as good as they are today. Right. And
I love seeing this like rise. It's coming up again. Like when I think of other people that are kind of in this space, like I think of like Bun, right? Mm-hmm. And the folks that are just this diving deep on the efficiency, diving deep on that's being their core focus. It attracts amazing talent to the project, and you can figure out all the other things along the line. So it's cool to see it happening at this level too. With Solid. And I think it kind of goes back to that beginning piece of like what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation around all the people that we kind of respect and all the people that we really enjoy their takes in the tech space. They're kind of gravitating around it, and it's kind of that efficiency first model I think might be the big the piece and reason why. You brought up signals, and we also mentioned the piece that Danny brought up. I would love for folks that might not have ever heard of those two pieces of technology. What the heck are they, and why are they so important, and how are they kind of driving us forward?
Yeah, single flight mutations is like one of my favorite things about Solid Start. It's like an amazing thing that Ryan was able to come up with, and now like Tanstack Start is also trying to adopt it. But yeah, you brought it up earlier how like it kind of basically doubles the performance in many cases. I like to think about it as this. We've always kind of had the ability to like either just write the simple code where when we have an action, like we send a post request, we send a put request to the server, it does something to our data, but then how do we update our UI based on that? Right. We've always had the ability to like, hey, we are fetching some data and storing in our state. Let's just refetch all that data, get all it back, put it in our state, and get our fresh UI. Right. So if you've used like Tanstack query, you might just be calling invalidate query, giving it the query key, which refreshes all that data. Right. That's the simplest way to do it. And it has a lot of niceties because you can, like you don't have to duplicate a lot of logic. It keeps the client side logic very simple. But on the other side, it's also like you're making additional request. You just made a post request, and now you're also making a get request. Or you're probably making 5 different get requests. If you have 5 data sources on the page that could have changed, you need to refetch all 5 of them at the same time. So it gets really unoptimal, but it's really, really nice to write the code in, right? But then we've also always had the ability to make it optimal. And instead of having to like refetch all that data ourselves, when we send our post request, we just write to cache ourselves. So for example, when we make in a to-do list app, when we make a to-do, we send a post request, and at the end, we just have our in-memory state for our to-dos, and we update it with our new to-do. We just add it in there, right? So we don't necessarily have to like refetch all the data at like all the time. We can just write that data in our state directly. But this becomes really, really complicated over time. Like if you have GraphQL, if you've seen those giant GraphQL queries, especially if you have multiple of them, like updating those gets a lot more complicated. You need to write that entire object. You need to make sure all the data is in there. And even then, like maybe you need to refetch some data anyways. So like if you think of LinkedIn, you have connection requests. You have 3 connection requests. You click accept on one. then you show that, okay, this person you are connected to, but then you need to fetch another connection request that you can show on that page, right? So sometimes you need to fetch some data anyways, even if you put all your effort into making, like writing that complex logic so that you can avoid refetching data. Maybe you still need to refetch data. So it's like, do you want to write the simple, inefficient code, or do you want to write the complex but optimal code, right? You always had this ability to make this trade-off. Single flight mutation just eliminate that. It's like, write the simple code and get the optimal experience. That's what I love the most about it, is you have like a mutation, an action, and at the end you just call revalidate, like, or invalidate query like you do in the simple version. But because it happens on the server, the client never makes additional requests to the server to fetch that data again. The server just goes to the database and it streams all that data at the same time. So it completely removed this trade-off of, do you write the simple but bad code, or do you write the complicated but performant code? You just write the simple and it is performant as well. So signals, you can probably think of it as like just variables in like a regular programming language, with a couple additional things that, instead of just like reading or writing to a variable that you do normally in programming, this variable is kind of like reactive, which means when you read from it, you can read from it in a special way where every time someone else writes to it, you get the latest value and you can do your thing again. So that's kind of like the basic concept of signals, which is when you read from this signal variable, and you can do some work with it, you can do some computation, and you can do that computation again, like it'll automatically run if that value changes. And based on this like little like concept or technology, you can say, you can kind of build a graph of computations over time, which like basically think of it as like Excel or any spreadsheet. Like every cell in a spreadsheet, it's not just a value, it's something that you can reference in a different cell. And when you change something here, this thing also changes. Like whatever formula here you have, it'll rerun based on the latest value. And that kind of builds a graph. And at the end, like you can just, like at the end of the graph, you update your UI. So that's kind of like the basic concept of it.
And so this is kind of like going in the face of like the virtual DOM.
With a virtual DOM, you wouldn't be listening to individual values, because with signals, what you can do is, if one value changes, you know exactly which cells to rerun, or like which cells need to recompute. The virtual DOM would be like, okay, I changed something here, update this entire page, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting when you mentioned about signals, because for a long time, Angular has had a very interesting rap. And especially like on Twitter or, other websites, you saw Angular kind of getting like a tough rap. It's not the cool kid on the block. Angular Signals came out. Mm-hmm. And everybody's like, I'm not going to mention who it is, but one person in particular who is almost always quiet on programming takes, he's like, oh, we got signals now. And he was tweeting up a storm. So, yeah, I love, and to be honest, you're right. Like, actually, both of y'all are right. When I think about one thing in particular, is like, I've often seen, for example, when Dino first came out, everyone was touting it as like the Node.js killer. And everyone was... Man, I heard that everywhere. So much so that like even bootcamp students were coming to me like, should I stop learning Node? Like everyone's telling me it's going to be that. I'm like, worst case scenario, let's say yes, it is the Node.js killer. This is going to take years. You're very good and very safe right now learning what you're learning. Obviously, we don't see it as that anymore, right? But we do see it as an impressive accomplishment software. A lot of people still utilizing it. Definitely not at the level of what everyone was hyping it up to be.
For sure.
But sometimes we need someone pushing or threatening positions for good competition to make, you know what, we need to improve this. We need to get to another level. And I saw a lot of that over the last couple of years. And so when people like Ryan are coming out with amazing achievements, I'm like, this is fantastic. It's fantastic for a couple reasons. Number one, it gets people excited again about something, because sometimes I feel like, especially at senior level, principal level, you sometimes get on what I call like the treadmill of programming. Like you do the same thing over and over. It's hard to get excited about something. You see this, you're like, oh, now this is different. They got their stuff together. And then it's cool for conferences, because guess what? We get really cool, interesting, different takes and talks based on that. When there's nothing going on, it's like the same mundane stuff over and over. So when we get actually some interesting takes where we can kind of get inspired a little bit, I think that's pretty cool too. And so kind of shifting ever so slightly now that I think about it, we all met at Commit Your Code.
Yeah.
I think, number one, you were very gracious to come down. I know we did a whole podcast episode on this, but in case people haven't heard the episode yet, or maybe they missed over it, Commit Your Code, we ran the whole thing on a shoestring budget, right? Like, we just did not have the budget to do a lot of stuff that bigger conferences do. And one thing that has eaten me up, even now, is that we were not able to cover travel and stay for the speakers. And so Dev literally, not only did he speak, he came down on his own dime, and he spoke, and he stayed at the hotel, and he had his own scooter. He brought a scooter with him. He's like little scooting
sitting
around,
right there.
going. It was cold as hell, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm on my scooter." I'm like, "What are you talking about, dude?"
It was fun.
Yeah.
It's also, it was cool to see too. Like, we hadn't met before, but it was cool to see people just like whisper. Like they were whispering because they're like, "Oh, that's him. There he is." And they were like, I was in the room like leading up to your talk, and people were geeked. They were excited to like finally meet you in person. So it's always cool to see like the community come together and to see people like meet the people that they listen to, right? Like, I feel like a lot of the ideas you talk about and a lot of the things that were coming out of the Solid.js community, people are like passionate about there. They want to learn more. And so I just know people were really excited to meet you and see you in person. And so that was just a really cool thing to see. I didn't know if you knew about that, so I wanted to make sure I told you.
I did not. I had no idea.
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah.
I mean, even me personally, I think when I think of a developer with high intelligence and great ability, you're one that comes to mind frequently. I don't say that to
it's high praise.
I'm very big. I'm very, very big about giving someone their accolades when they can hear it versus afterwards. So I'd love, for me to you, that's definitely a big deal to me. The other thing that I would say is I knew you were dabbling in Solid.js. I didn't know to the extent that you became a maintainer. That was news. I was like, really? I had no clue you were contributing to that level, which, you know, maybe that's foolish of me or not. I really wasn't paying attention. I would always see it here and there, like, oh, he's doing this with it. Oh, him and Ryan are talking again. Oh, I saw Ryan's live stream. I saw Dev in the chat. Okay. Okay. He mentioned Dev again. Interesting. Then I see this post. Dev as a maintainer. What? How did that go about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a very surreal moment for me as well, getting that invitation. Yeah, slightly circling back to your earlier point, where the way that I like to say, or the way that Ryan likes to put it sometimes, is Solid is a lot more popular among framework authors than it is like between developers, right? And that's that's for a good reason. Like Solid, I don't think it'll ever have like massive adoption like React. It'll be great if it does, but the core point of Solid is not like be the framework that everyone uses. The core point of Solid is like innovate on the ideas of fine-grained reactivity, see how far we can push it, and like keep pushing it to the point where it can do more and more things, like developing this technology and influence other tools to do the same. Like, the biggest achievement of Solid is not that it has a high user count right now. The biggest achievement of Solid is that Vue and Svelte are rewriting themselves to look like Solid. Angular has adopted signals. Preact has adopted signals. React put all their effort into this compiler, and now they're calling their compiler fine-grained reactivity. So these are like considered achievements for like the Solid.js team, right? And that means being on the core team of Solid.js is not about like maintaining the framework and like building features, fixing bugs, addressing user concerns. It's more about looking at signals as a paradigm, seeing how far we can push it, what are like other things that we can do with it. So like one of the big reasons why I was given the invitation is because I was looking into how can we make real-time development, or with like WebSockets and things like that, how can we make that simpler using signals, which means using signals as a way to manage state, not only on the client, but also on the server, and then have that have that seamless communication between the server and client, without having like extra overhead of other libraries or frameworks that we might be using today.
You can't just drop that without telling us more about how's that working? What are you doing?
Yeah, it's the basic concept is like, if you've seen like Next.js or anything like that with the use server, where you just add a use server and you export a function, you call it on the client, and now it becomes an HTTP request, right? It's kind of a similar idea, but instead of use server, you write use socket, and now like all your communication becomes WebSockets instead of HTTP. And inside your use socket, you can create signals. You can do reactivity, you can have state, and that state now lives on the server. But you write your code the same way you write your code on the client. This is like a rabbit hole that we can go into, but yeah, that's the really kind of broad idea. Yeah.
What is something that people have built with that so far, or that you've built with it so far? Like, what's an example?
It's like right now, it's very, very early. I've built like a very simple to-do list that's real time, but it also has user presence. So like if you two people are looking at the same to-do list, you can see each other mouse go around. So I've built like just simple real-time stuff with it right now, just as a way to test if it works or not. But it's like super early. It's not in a state right now where anyone can adopt it. It's like very experimental, very like it's research basically. And Solid core team is full of researchers.
So are you going to do a whole conference talk on this?
If it gets to a good point, yeah, 100%.
Changing pace a little bit, you even mentioned, and I've known this, like you do momentum. I've heard great things. You've even shown me great things about it. Like, what are some of your experiences with momentum? How do you see this going forward? Are you doing it this year? Is this something people should be looking out for? What are the dates?
Yeah, Momentum is a conference we do in Cincinnati in October, usually like third, fourth week. It's a single day multi-track conference. It's not 2 days. It's like the kind of crowd that we get is mostly like enterprise, Java, .NET, a decent bit of Angular as well, mostly like backend stuff. It's a lot less focused on like the front end bubble, like some of other conferences tend to be. But yeah, it's the very first tech conference that I ever went to. It's the first conference that I volunteered at. It's the first conference it's the only conference that I help organize at this point, obviously. But yeah, it's like one of my favorite days of the whole year. The other people on the committee, on the organizing team are some of my best friends. And
there you go.
And it's not a small conference. Like Cincinnati is, and like it's a good city, and the conference is like we get 300, 400, 500 people. Like it's not as big as some of the huge ones, but it's also like decently big. We do it in a casino. Like obviously not. Yeah, they have a pretty good like event section, but it's fun being there. And yeah, we get some of the best speakers like throughout the country.
What you gain in wealth of knowledge, you lose in actual wealth.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
That's awesome. Organizing, obviously, like, I did my very first in-person conference at Commit Your Code. Like, what things have you learned via organizing? What are some like experiences that you're like, this could have been way better? Like, I know I learned a lot doing Commit Your Code. I mean, a lot. I wrote like a whole article on everything that I learned. There's more that I have to learn. This year, we haven't even put tickets on sale yet. And like people, I even tweeted about it. Like people already bought flights. I was like, we haven't even put the tickets on sale. Like you announced the dates. That was good enough for us. I was like, oh, wow. So I'm really, at this point, kind of nervous because Commit Your Code originally was going to be like a one and done situation. We were never going to do it again. And so now like I've really been thinking about like, what are we going to do to improve? How are we going to facilitate this? What are going to be ways? Because for me, at least, I'm constantly racking my brain around what develops real human connection around these things. Because any conference you go to, there's a hallway track. Any conference you go to, there's a place where people are hanging out on the side having a conversation. But I'm really thinking a lot more on what do we do for the person that isn't part of that group? Like, how do we get them involved where they're hanging out with other devs? They feel like it was a fulfilling experience from a knowledge standpoint, a technical standpoint, but also from the standpoint of I feel like I actually enjoyed myself internally. So like these are things that I'm constantly racking my brain about. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
The first thing that I could say is that Momentum, it's a multi-track conference. It's a one-day conference, but we don't record or live stream anything. It's like you had to be there to experience it, right? It's it's something that I hopefully want to change, but it's something that I think you are already doing way, way better than most other conferences. There's a lot of conferences like this that just simply don't have the effort that they can put into to record, or like live streaming is a whole other level beyond recording, and you go all the way to live streaming, not even just recording. So I think you're already doing much better there, and it's something that a lot of other conferences, especially Momentum, like we hope that we can get to at some point. And obviously that's really important for making your content accessible to other people, right? But at the same time, I feel like maybe some speakers feel like it's better if it's not recorded, because then no one will show up. Everyone will just watch online. So it's like, as an organizer, I feel like it's better to have this stuff recorded, but maybe some speakers disagree with that. That's like a whole different story. From what I've learned, even like before starting to organize conferences, I was volunteering at them, and I continually say to this day, volunteering is a cheat code. Volunteering at conferences is a cheat code for someone who's new in the industry. Shout out to Taylor Dessen, who gave me that lesson the very first time. Volunteering is how I got some of my like best connections to people like in this industry. Even to the point where some of those connections gave me free tickets to other conferences that I can go and do this again. Like instead of having to go volunteer again, I just got a free ticket. So yeah, like new to the industry, look for events, look for conferences that you can volunteer at. It's an amazing way to meet people. You have like kind of a special behind the scenes pass to talk to the speakers. And obviously you get to learn how the conference is organized. One of the other things that I learned is sponsors often don't know what they want out of conferences. Because historically they were just like, here's a bunch of money, go spend it somehow. But now that the budgets are getting tight, they have to actually think about how they're spending money. And turns out conferences are not like the top notch way to do it. So we have to work especially hard to come up with our own value propositions. Like why should you sponsor this conference? And then they have to think about what they want out of it.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, I'm trying to get involved with the bunch of money conversation. Where's that at? Because
exactly. You're 6 years too late.
Dang it. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. You know, we learned a lot doing Commit Your Code. We had several sponsors. Honestly, they went above and beyond. We learned a lot through that. Obviously, one of the biggest issues was, at least for companies and organizations, when we said we were giving the proceeds to charity, that just scared everybody away. Yeah. And the other thing too is the conference was originally called the Commit Your Code Conference for Charity. This year, that for charity part completely came off. We're still donating everything 100%. But from the business standpoint and the sponsors, now they're only concerned with we're sponsoring the conference. And I've told them, like, whatever we do with the proceeds and money, that's our business. But we're just going to put on a fantastic conference. You're going to love it. People are going to really engage. And to be honest, I was really focused on one thing. Like, I coached a lot of the sponsors to where I was like, stop trying to sell folks. Like, I see y'all at every conference. You do the exact same thing. You don't have the results that you want. And it's the same scenario over and over and over again. Stop selling. Developers know this stuff, man. Like, can you just treat people like human beings? And I bet you that conversation is going to go way further. We did that this year. And you know how, and I even, like some of the sponsors had their speakers give talks. I coached them on their talks. You know how many have said this was like their best talk they've ever given? And I was like, it's crazy what happens when you treat people like people. And then from a business standpoint, obviously, like, you're going to get whatever referrals, conversations that you want, or at least information that you're trying to ascertain from that individual, because you're treating them like a human being. And obviously, I'm sure there's some sales tactics somewhere. I don't know what they are, but I'm sure there's some that they're employing to make that a more favorable conversation. But you'd be shocked at how far that goes. And so I want to create more organic conversations, obviously, for the sponsors, so that way they feel great about sponsoring the event and whatnot. And that way we can get food and we can get stuff. Because again, our conference, we're lean as lean can come, right? I'm happy to announce, like, we've got 3 sponsors locked in. And so as of this very moment, we've got more money now than we had last year. So we're already doing a lot better. But if we're going to start getting the numbers that I think we're going to get, we really, really need to get sponsorship to take some of the weight off of our shoulders, especially around food. That's the biggest cost. So we really need to get like quality food, make sure people feel like it's worth it. Because even though for us, like our tickets are $30, but it's like we cover people's food for those 2 days. So it's like we got to make sure.
Taco Bell. Don't tell me you're switching up to Taco Bell. Come on now.
We're gonna have that for sure. I think that just added a lot of flair. But I would love having more options. And so we want to have. And to be honest, I won't be shocked if we hit like 800-900 people in person this year, based off of what I'm seeing.
Nice.
I'm nervous about that. I would love it to be smaller, but no matter what that number is, I've told, the other admin and all volunteers that no matter what happens, the priority has to always be, if it's 5 people showing up or 5,000 people showing up, each one of them is going to have an experience. We got to make sure it's great. And so I just want to make sure from a technical standpoint, it's well worth their time for those flights. From a personal standpoint, it's well worth it because they felt like they made some friends and had some good conversations. And from a social standpoint, community standpoint, I just really want to bring everybody together. The whole development community, no matter how big, wide, or far away it is, it's so small. And so it's like, I want everyone to feel like they're actually part of the community, no matter what it is that we do. So I'm like, if you look at my whiteboard over here, it's filled to the corners with ideas that I've been thinking about for the last like couple weeks. I really want to make this one like a big one. We're not a big name conference, but I really feel like we can make more impact than we made this previous year.
I'm sure you will be a big name conference very soon.
Big name conferences, man, they're making millions. We're making hundreds. And so...
Hey, not all big name conferences make a lot of money. There's a decent bit that I go to that are like 1,000 people, 1,500 people, and they don't make a lot of money. They're just big name because they've been around forever and they do fantastic things. Like that. How much money do you think that conference makes?
Yeah, he's re-strategizing the whole thing. Now that's my brother, man, and I'm excited to see what he comes with. I've never been more excited for a comeback ever than I am with that, and so I'm interested to see what he decides to do. But he definitely, that model he was going with doesn't work anymore, unfortunately, and so I think he was really trying to see if things would bounce back. I think he saw what he needed to see. And he's like, you know what? Instead of me throwing more good money after bad, let me pivot this to where the community needs me and I'm going to serve it. And it's a learning moment. I think, you know how many companies have been so ignorant to situations like that to where they do bad business, bad things, and they just destroy it all?
Oh, for sure.
I love and honor the fact that he figured it out soon enough to be like, you know what? We're not going to suffer another year the way this was. We're going to pivot this and we're going to thrive in this new way. And so I'm all for it. Well, let me ask you this. I know we're nearing the end here. Have you built some tools around your conference? Like I'm building some tools right now. Like I've even shared this publicly. I built an entire event platform that I'm still working on right now. I'm really, really excited about this. I've kind of teased it online, but I actually think it's going to be something big. I think it's going to solve, we've built a lot of tools that I think are going to solve problems for organizers, meetup organizers, and conference organizers, not just one or the other. But like, have you built your own tools around this? Like, what are some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things that I've done for Momentum is that we built an app for attendees because I noticed that conferences either have apps that are awesome, that are kind of awesome, or they either suck or they don't have any app at all, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to do is not just like build an app for Momentum, but build an app that any conference can use. Like it'll have your schedule, it'll have like anyone can bookmark their sessions to see what they need to, what they want to attend. One of the reasons why we wanted it is because I want to replace a lot of our Google Forms, because we were sending attendees Google Forms for like feedback, and I wanted to make it like as easy as possible. So you can just go on an app, you have 3 smiley faces, you can tap one, and that's the quickest way to provide feedback. Or then you can leave more detailed feedback if you want as well. And this year, like we had like a speaker to speaker program as well, where speakers like give other speakers direct feedback, like more detailed feedback that attendees do, like from the speaker perspective. We brought that into the app as well. So yeah, this app is kind of like a lot of things that we do as conference organizers, or that we have attendees and speakers do, that we are trying to consolidate into this app that we use for our own conference as well. But ideally, I want to get this to a point where any conference can pick it up and not have to build their own and not have to pick one of the sucky off-the-shelf options.
I've often struggled with this where sometimes there's tools that focus on developer experience and then maybe performance lacks, or tools that focus on performance and then the developer experience lacks. I kind of mentioned this even earlier, but it's like they don't have to be trade-offs. Solid.js, they're kind of aiming to do both, and I think they're kind of doing it really, really well. So I'm impressed. For those listening, if you haven't messed with Solid.js, if you have a use case for it, it might be worth it. I guess let's move on to Ask Danny, Leon, and Dev, and let's wrap this one up.
Do you use any AI tools recently, Dev?
So, yeah, I have been really slow on the AI wave. I use Cursor a little bit, but I haven't paid for its tier yet, so I can't really use the fancy composer features. I use ChatGPT.
Spend all his money on that scooter, man.
Yeah. Scooter is very expensive. I don't have money for AI. But other than that, just ChatGPT and Notion AI here and there. Yeah, not really much. Especially since I started doing some more Solid.js stuff. It's I can build demos with my AI stuff, but AI is not going to help me with Solid.js code.
So I have a question that I think that might be in this vein that I would really kind of want your perspective on. So
sure,
editor, we'll get in here. All right. The question is, this is so silly. I use ChatGPT to help me learn coding concepts I struggle with. Am I trash? Trash can emoji. And so as someone who's kind of on the frontier of some things that others might not have had the chance yet to learn, and you're probably having to learn a lot of new things and experiment and research, what would you say to that person? And how do you learn the things that you need to know to do the things that you do?
Yeah, great question. First of all, not at all. If you're using AI to help you learn something, fantastic. What I have a problem with is using AI to avoid learning something. That's the real problem. If you're using it to make yourself better at your job, please go for it. That's probably one of the best ways to use AI. But AI, you're going to run into limitations as you get into more higher level concepts or more kind of obscure concepts. As I'm working on Solid.js itself, or its reactivity system, it's next generation, or building my own framework. Those are very kind of super niche, kind of somewhat unexplored territories, and they require a lot of complicated logic and interactions, and that's where kind of the AI might start shitting itself. But until then, if you're just learning how to build apps, AI has a pretty good knowledge on that, and it'll help you get to a pretty good point. And it's probably better than most bootcamp or college instructors at because yeah.
Sure. I got my take on this. You've basically said, I think 90% of what I would have said, so I'm not going to add too much. The one thing that I will say is AI, there's two sides of AI to me. And I've been on the record saying this before. AI is the best problem solver when you give it a specific problem at times. And then AI is the most aggressive, toxic ex you've ever had, because it will gaslight the heck out of you. And one prime example of this was yesterday. I was like, you know what? I wrote this coding tutorial, blog on use optimistic hook from React 19. And it's like, what would be great? Let me put all the code on Stack Blitz. And I was like, it would be even great, because I haven't been able to use it in a while, and I wanted an excuse to use it. I'm going to use Tailwind, because this is so simple. I just made a couple comments with a like button, so that way when someone liked it, basically on social media, you'll see either the immediate UI reflection of that display, of that like showing right away, or a delay in the UI, but because there's no use optimistic hook there, it takes a second before it's displayed. Putting that code into Stack Blitz was a literal nightmare because Tailwind. And ChatGPT couldn't figure it out. DeepSeek couldn't figure it out. None of them could figure it out. And then I saw that Stack Blitz had Bolt.whatever, their Bolt. AI tool. And that still took 10 iterations before it figured it out. And it's telling me that I'm not handling the error correctly. I'm like, what are you talking about? I've done every single thing that you've told me to do. And there's no reason why these like it's not processing this post CSS config file, not working for the life of me. And so it's telling me I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, there's just no way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's definitely like moments of frustration that you can get into, and especially as a beginner, it's very hard to recognize like when you're being gaslighted.
Yeah.
I guess the other second piece of that question that I tacked on because I have a personal interest in it is other than telling people like skill issue, like what do you, how do you get to where you're at? Like when you're a core maintainer on something that's trying all these experimental things, like where's that learning coming from? Where is that knowledge coming from? Like, what are you doing to like expose yourself to ideas, to try things? Is it trial and error at your level? Like, where is that coming from? Where are you like gaining that knowledge or just how do you push the frontier forward? I think that's something that's kind of mystifying for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it's just spending like way too much time building and rebuilding and trying to build and failing things. Like every time I spend time building something, I learn new things. And like there's obviously a second part as well where like content creation and trying to teach what I know has me like learning it even more deeply. But even to get to that point, you like just spend as much time as you can building things, especially if you're experimenting with things that you've never used before. Like build something you've never built before, using something you've never built before. Don't do it all at the same time. So if you're building kind of a new kind of project a new kind of app that you haven't done before, pick a tool that you already know. Or if you're building an app that you already know how to build, you've built it before, use a tool that you don't know. So always make sure that when you're spending time building something, you're learning by you doing something you haven't done before. And then really trying to like compare like how is this different from the last time? What am I doing now that I wasn't doing before? What do I have to no longer do now because of this new thing? And like reading a lot.
I would say OG D. Thompson Dem followers know that, especially in the beginning, I had 3 acronyms that I live by. I still live by it to this day. ABL, ABB, CCC. Always be learning, always be building, code.
Yep.
Always be learning. You got to learn through multiple methods and mediums. Can those 2 teachers teach the same? Always be building. Build something because you feel like you know the entire world of programming watching a tutorial, but as soon as you put your fingers on the keyboard, you freeze, right? I've done that a million times myself. So it's like, actually build something with the things that you're learning and then code. Let those fingers dance around on that keyboard. And people just get so intimidated and shocked at what they're able to achieve just by building something. It could be something foolish. It could be something amazing, but you don't have to cure cancer with code. And I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about building something or rebuilding something, they're like, well, this isn't making like a massive impact. And listen, sometimes just building something for the sake of building is often a good ambitious path to be upon. And
the only other thing I would tack on top is reading blog posts, reading newsletters, watching videos from like people who know what they're talking about. That like for me, I subscribe to like 50 different newsletters like about 2 years into my journey, and I spent a lot of time reading them, and that has been like probably one of the biggest things that has helped me get to this point, which is just reading all different viewpoints, all different about like different technologies, even the ones that I'm not using. So like a lot of times,
like, read them any?
Yeah, a lot.
Wow.
I mean, probably not as much because now like now I try to spend more time building than reading, but there was a time where I spent more time reading than building. Like there has to be a balance. Like don't just keep reading. Don't get stuck in that like tutorial hell or article hell, but also like don't close off like all the viewpoints. Like a lot of people, I'm using React and I don't care about anything else. Like that's the worst things you can do for your like learning journey.
All right. Well, I think this has been a really good episode. I've really enjoyed it. I even took a couple notes, so I always think that's a win when we can do that, right? So thank you all so much for hanging out with us. You could be anywhere in the world you decide to hang out with us. That means a lot to us. If you haven't already, please drop a like on the podcast, wherever it is that you're listening to it, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever else you you're listening, drop a like. If you dislike the podcast, drop a like and press the cancel button. I really appreciate that. So outside of that, it's been real. It's been fun. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace.